Snow covered most of the sidewalk by the time I stepped off the bus. 10 hours on the road left my legs stiff and my back sore, but I kept walking. I had one reason to be here, and it was inside St. Luke's Hospital. My grandson had been born the night before. I adjusted the strap of my old leather purse and headed toward the doors. Inside, the lobby was warm and bright. Families carried Christmas bags and cups of hospital cocoa. A pair of kids hurried past with a stuffed reindeer. I kept my coat buttoned. The fabric still held the cold. I followed the sign to the maternity wing, walking slowly along the polished tile. I had rehearsed this visit for weeks in my head. A quiet hello, a small smile, maybe a chance to hold him for a moment. When I turned the corner, I saw Andrew standing by the wall. He wasn't looking around. He wasn't smiling. He stood still with his hands in his pockets, staring at the floor like he was waiting for something he didn't want to face. I walked toward him, small steps, steady breathing. "Andrew," I said. "I made it. How's Samantha? How's the baby?" He lifted his head, but only for a second. His eyes went past me, then down the hall. His jaw clenched. A nurse walked by, pushing a cart of blankets, and he stepped slightly aside, like he didn't want anyone to stop near us. "Mom," he said quietly, "please, leave." My hand tightened around the purse strap. Leave? I just got here. He glanced again toward the delivery rooms. The hallway lights flickered once, just a small pulse, but enough for me to notice how pale he looked. "Samantha only wants family today," he said. The sentence landed clean and cold. A doctor passed us, flipping through a chart. Parents whispered nearby while waiting for a nurse to open a door. Everything sounded normal, except for the space between Andrew and me. "I am family," I said. He shook his head. "Don't push it. She never wanted you here." I felt my jaw lock, not from anger, from the effort to stay steady. Christmas music drifted faintly from a distant speaker, soft enough to make the moment feel even sharper. "Samantha never wanted me." "Here?" I asked quietly. Andrew looked at the floor. "Mom, don't make this harder." I didn't step back. I didn't argue. I just stood there long enough for one nurse to look over and then look away. People were moving around us, but no one stopped. It was as if the hallway wasn't meant for a scene, not even a small one. I nodded once. My voice stayed low. "All right." I adjusted the purse strap again. The leather was worn, the edges softened from years of use. Robert bought it for me the year Andrew started school. I ran my thumb across the seam without thinking, grounding myself for a second before turning toward the exit. I walked away at a normal pace, not fast, not slow, just enough to keep myself from freezing in place. The tiles reflected the overhead lights. My boots made small, controlled sounds against the floor. When the automatic doors opened, winter wind rushed in, sharp and heavy. Outside, snowflakes hit my face right away. The cold didn't bother me as much as the silence that followed, the kind you feel more than hear. Cars pulled in and out of the parking lot. A couple holding a newborn passed me on their way inside, laughing softly about something the nurse had said. I kept my eyes on the sidewalk. My fingers were stiff from the cold, so I placed one hand inside my coat pocket, while the other held the purse steady against my hip. The straps were familiar, solid, something I could rely on. At the curb, I stopped. Not to rethink anything, just to breathe. My son had told me to leave, not loudly, not angrily, just firmly, like the decision had already been made somewhere else, long before I arrived. "She never wanted you here." I repeated the sentence in my head once, then let it settle. Facts have a way of staying exactly as they are, no matter how you feel about them. The bus stop bench was covered in a thin layer of snow. I brushed off enough space to sit. My coat crinkled under me as I lowered myself onto the cold metal. I kept my hands folded, thumbs pressed together lightly so they wouldn't shake. A family walked past, carrying a white blanket embroidered with a newborn's name. The baby's father glanced at me for a moment, then looked away politely. I didn't blame him. I looked like any other woman waiting for a ride on Christmas Day. When the bus turned the corner, its headlights cleared a bright line through the snowfall. I stood up and gripped the metal pole beside the bench until the doors opened. Warm air spilled out, a soft contrast to the freezing wind around me. I climbed aboard and chose a seat near the back. The heater under the floor hummed. A few passengers wore Christmas sweaters and held coffee cups. I pulled my purse onto my lap and rested my hands on it. The leather was warm from my body heat. As the bus pulled away, the hospital grew smaller in the window. The lights around the entrance blurred, stretched by the motion and the snow. Somewhere inside that building, Noah was wrapped in a blanket, probably sleeping, probably unaware that I had come all this way just to be turned around in the hallway. I didn't cry. There was nothing to say or do, just the steady hum of the engine and the snow hitting the windows. I watched the hospital fade behind the trees and whispered, very quietly, I only wanted to meet him. The motel sign flickered when I reached it. A red vacancy light buzzed above the office door, cutting through the dark. My boots left thin tracks in the snow as I walked toward the counter. The clerk pushed a form toward me without looking up. I slid my ID across the scratched surface, waited for him to process it, then took the room key he placed beside the register. Room 112 was at the far end of the building. The walkway rail was cold under my hand as I moved along it. My breath came out in faint clouds, and the wind cut through the gap in my coat. I unlocked the door and stepped into a small space with thin carpet and a heater that clicked twice before turning on. I closed the door behind me and stood near it for a moment. No sounds came from the neighboring rooms. The only noise was the heater starting to push warm air unevenly into the room. I placed my leather purse on the small table, removed my gloves, and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped under my weight, squeaking slightly. I kept my back straight. My hands were still cold from the walk, so I pressed them together. The room smelled faintly of old detergent and pine cleaner. A single lamp cast a warm rectangle of light across the blanket. I didn't talk to myself. I didn't move much. I just sat there until the tightness in my chest eased enough for me to breathe normally again. The bus ride, the hospital, the hallway, everything replayed in order with no gaps. Andrew avoiding my eyes, the flicker of the ceiling lights, the sentence that ended the entire visit. She never wanted you here. My shoulders dropped a little. Not from defeat, from the weight of knowing it was real. I leaned forward and rested my elbows on my knees. The floor felt uneven under my feet, one tile slightly raised at the corner. I stared at it for a long moment. When my vision blurred, I blinked hard until everything came back into focus. A muffled sound from somewhere down the hall reached me. Someone opening a door, a television turning on, a toilet flushing, normal motel noises, nothing dramatic, nothing that matched the kind of day I had just lived. I pulled my purse closer, opened it, and took out the small photo of Andrew from when he was 5. The edges had worn down over the years. His smile was wide, his hair messy from running around the yard. I held the photo steady, not letting my hand shake. A memory surfaced, clear and quiet. The night Andrew was born. It had been snowing then, too. Robert drove us to the old county hospital with the windshield fogging up every few minutes. I remembered gripping the armrest as another contraction hit, the radio playing a Christmas song we both half recognized. When Andrew arrived, Robert placed his hand on my shoulder and told me everything would get easier now. I remembered the green hospital gown, the cold water I drank, and the way Andrew's tiny fingers curled around mine within minutes of being placed in my arms. I didn't smile at the memory. I didn't cry either. I just held it for a moment and then let it settle. Another flash came. Andrew at 10, building a school project out of cardboard on the kitchen table. Andrew at 16, walking across the stage to receive his diploma while I clapped from the back row. Andrew standing in our driveway after Robert's funeral, too quiet, too tired, unable to look at me for more than a few seconds. Each memory landed clean, without commentary. Facts don't soften themselves. I placed the photo face down on the table and leaned back on the bed. The springs shifted under me. My coat was still buttoned, so I unfastened it slowly and folded it beside me. My hands were steadier now. I stared at the ceiling, The paint was a little uneven near the corner. A faint hum from the heater filled the room. Outside, a car drove past, tires crunching through snow. Christmas used to be loud in our home, wrapping paper everywhere, Andrew running down the hall, Robert carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate into the living room. Now it was a motel room with a single lamp and a cold draft slipping through the window frame. I lay back slowly, keeping my shoes on. The mattress dipped again. My eyes focused on the lamp's glow against the ceiling. I didn't drift off. I stayed fully awake, letting the events of the day line up in a straight row, Andrew blocking me in the hallway. His voice low but firm, the sentence that cut everything down to size, leaving without seeing Noah, walking into the cold, sitting on the bus alone. I turned my head to the side. The nightstand drawer sat slightly open. Inside, a small notepad and pen were placed next to a worn Bible. I didn't reach for any of them. I kept my hands on the blanket and breathed slowly until the tightness behind my eyes faded. Silence filled the room again. Not peaceful silence, the kind that tells you no one is coming, no calls are expected, no door will open. I let the reality settle without fighting it. Andrew had made his choice today. A clear one. A public one. I sat up again, elbows on my knees, and kept my hands clasped until they stopped shaking. My voice didn't break when I whispered, "All right." It wasn't a question or a plea, just acknowledgement. The kind that comes when a door you kept hoping would open stays closed, no matter how long you stand in front of it. I turned off the lamp. The room fell into darkness, except for the soft glow from the parking lot outside. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling again, this time without the light. The heater clicked once more, then settled into a steady hum. My house was dark when I unlocked the door. The porch light had gone out earlier in the week, and I hadn't bothered to replace it. Cold air followed me inside as I stepped into the small entryway and closed the door behind me. The space felt the same as when I left. Quiet, orderly, untouched. I hung my coat on the hook and placed my leather purse on the counter. The heater clicked twice before turning on, pushing warm air through the vents with a low hum. I walked into the kitchen and switched on the overhead light. It flickered once before staying steady. The room looked exactly as it had that morning. The mug on the counter, the folded dish towel, the half-used jar of instant coffee beside the sink. I reached for the mug and held it for a moment. My fingers traced the chipped edge. I filled it halfway with water from the tap and placed it in the microwave. The hum filled the room, along with the faint scent of old coffee grounds stuck in the drain. When the microwave beeped, I took the mug out and set it on the table without drinking from it. The house made small, settling sounds, the refrigerator motor turning on, a pipe adjusting somewhere behind the wall. I sat down at the table and kept my eyes on the surface. A small ring from an old water stain curved faintly near my hand. Andrew grew up in this kitchen. I didn't revisit those memories on purpose. They appeared on their own. I could see him at 8 years old, swinging his legs at this very table, asking for more pancakes. I remembered wiping syrup off his cheeks, sending him off to school, tucking drawings into a box beside my bed. After Robert died, the house grew quieter, but still familiar. Andrew and I managed. He finished high school, then community college, then moved to Denver for work. Our calls used to be regular, short ones, but warm enough. He would update me about his job or a new apartment. I would tell him about the bakery shifts and the neighborhood news. My eyes shifted toward the living room. A photo frame rested on the bookshelf. Andrew at 16 with Robert, both smiling proudly at a school event. Dust had gathered along the top edge. I stood up, walked over, and picked it up. The frame felt cold. The living room held other pieces of us, too. The couch Robert bought. The lamp Andrew knocked over when he was 12. The rug we found at a yard sale. Years layered into the objects around me, quiet and steady. I placed the frame back where it belonged. I walked down the hallway to the bedroom. The light there was softer, coming from the small lamp near the bed. I sat on the edge and rested my hands on my lap. The emptiness of the room didn't feel new. It felt familiar in a way I didn't want to acknowledge. I thought about the motel, the bus ride, the hallway at the hospital. Andrew's voice, low, controlled, avoiding conflict as always. He had stood between me and the door that led to Noah. He didn't raise his voice, but the meaning was clear. "She never wanted you here." I kept my breathing steady. I didn't want to replay it again, but my mind did it anyway. The flicker of the lights, the draft in the hallway, the way Andrew shifted his weight as if he wanted the ground to swallow him. I kept my eyes on the dresser. One drawer was slightly open, revealing the top of a knitted scarf I never finished. I closed it gently. My hand froze halfway down. A thought passed through me. Quiet, factual. I might already be losing my son. I didn't say it aloud. I didn't need to. The truth didn't change whether it was spoken or not. I stood and walked back to the kitchen, needing movement. My boots left faint marks on the floor from melted snow. I wiped them with a paper towel, then tossed the towel into the trash. I opened a cabinet, took out a container of soup, and placed it on the counter. I stared at it for a moment before putting it back. I wasn't hungry. Instead, I poured myself a small glass of water and drank half of it. The cold slid down my throat. Not refreshing, just functional. I walked to the window above the sink and pulled the curtain aside. Snow covered the yard. The tree branches hung low under the weight. A neighbor's porch light glowed faintly across the street. A dog barked once somewhere far away, then silence returned. Inside the glass reflection, my face looked older than I remembered. Not tired, just older. I let the curtain fall back into place. My phone sat on the counter beside my purse. The screen was blank. No messages, no missed calls. Nothing from Andrew. Nothing from anyone. I tapped the screen, watched it light up, then set it down again. I wondered how long it would take before he sent something. An apology, an explanation, maybe a short message pretending nothing had happened. Or maybe he wouldn't reach out at all. The thought didn't shock me. It felt like something that had been building slowly for years. I walked into the living room and sat on the couch. The cushion dipped slightly. I folded my hands and rested them on my lap. The quiet was steady, thick enough to feel, but familiar enough not to frighten me. A thought surfaced with the same clarity as the cold air outside. When did my son become a stranger? My voice didn't break. It didn't tremble. It was simply a quiet question directed at an empty room. I leaned back and closed my eyes for a few seconds. Not to sleep, just to rest. The house buzzed with low, familiar noises. Nothing unexpected, nothing demanding. I opened my eyes again and looked at the hallway leading to Andrew's old room. The door was slightly open. I walked toward it, pushed it open, and stepped inside. The room had been cleaned out years ago, but a few things remained. An old trophy, a stack of textbooks, a single photo on the wall of him in his graduation gown. I touched the frame lightly. Dust clung to my finger. "Maybe my son is already gone," I whispered. There was no emotion in the sentence, only the weight of recognition. The next morning, I woke before the sun. The house was still cold, and the heater took a few minutes to push warm air into the rooms. I wrapped a sweater around my shoulders and moved slowly through the kitchen, keeping my hands busy with small tasks, rinsing a mug, wiping the counter, straightening a stack of mail. It was easier to focus on simple things than on the empty hours waiting ahead. Andrew used to call me every Sunday. He had kept that routine for years after moving to Denver. The calls grew shorter over time, but they were steady. We talked about his job, his apartment, the weather. Nothing deep, but consistent enough to feel like connection. Then the calls started arriving every 2 weeks. Then once a month. Then only when he needed something. Advice about a bill, a question about a recipe, a form he didn't understand. I didn't mind then. It felt normal for a young man building his own life. Now, sitting alone in the kitchen with the refrigerator humming behind me, I could track the shift more clearly. I finished my mug of coffee and checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls. I placed it face down on the table. Around mid-morning, I reached for the small notebook I kept near the phone. Inside were dates of past calls and a few notes from conversations. I turned to a page from 3 years earlier. Andrew's handwriting was there. He had jotted down instructions for a recipe during a visit. I traced the ink with my finger. The phone stayed silent. Later that day, I walked to the small neighborhood grocery store. The sidewalk was icy, so I took careful steps. Cars passed with snow piled on their roofs. Inside the store, a few customers walked slowly through the aisles, bundled up in thick coats. I picked up milk, a loaf of bread, and a bag of apples. Rosa appeared near the produce section. She pushed her cart closer, a warm scarf wrapped around her neck. She used to come over for coffee once a week back when I worked fewer hours. We didn't see each other as often anymore. "Cold morning," she whispered, adjusting her gloves. I nodded. "It is." Her eyes lingered on me for a moment, as if measuring something she didn't want to ask outright. "You're back early." I placed the apples in my cart. "I didn't stay long." She exhaled softly. "You should rest today." "I will." We walked together for a minute or two, choosing vegetables without much conversation. Rosa never pushed for details, but her presence had a steadying effect. When we reached the checkout, she touched my arm lightly. "If you need anything, you know where I am." I offered a small nod. "Thank you." After leaving the store, I returned home and put the groceries away. The house felt even quieter than before. I stood near the window, watching the wind push snow across the street. My phone sat on the counter, screen dark. Andrew met Samantha during those years when his calls were getting shorter. I remembered when he first mentioned her. His voice had been cautious, like he didn't want me to get the wrong idea. He told me she was smart, organized, serious about her career. I had been happy for him. I also remembered the first time I tried reaching out to her. I had left her a polite voicemail, welcoming her to the family and offering help if she ever needed anything. She never returned the call. Andrew explained it away. Busy schedule, long shifts, different time zones. I had believed him. Weeks passed, then months. When I texted simple greetings, "Hope your day is good," I received short replies from Andrew. Never from her. Every invitation I extended was met with a version of the same response: "Let me check with Samantha," or "We're busy this weekend." At first, I tried not to read into it. I knew young couples often wanted privacy, but the distance kept increasing. Phone calls dropped to once every few months. Holidays grew thinner. Photos from Andrew's life appeared on social media, work events, outings with friends, trips with Samantha, none of which he mentioned to me. I walked to the living room and stood near the bookshelf. One photo showed Andrew in college, standing in front of a campus building on a sunny day. I lifted it and wiped off the dust. His expression then was relaxed, open. I placed the frame back in its spot. A memory surfaced. The call where Andrew announced he was getting married. He had told me in the middle of a work shift. No lead-up, no excitement in his tone, just a simple statement followed by logistical details about the date and venue. He ended the conversation quickly, promising to follow up later. He never did. That night, I sat alone at the table, staring at the blank notepad beside the phone. I tried to imagine what their wedding would be like. I pictured a small ceremony, maybe a simple reception, with moments where I could at least offer a hug or a warm wish. I'd felt hopeful then, not realizing how far I'd already been pushed to the edges. The slow fade didn't happen in one moment. It happened across many small ones. Missed calls, short texts, polite excuses, Samantha never picking up, Andrew checking with her before answering anything. Days turning into weeks, weeks into months. By the time he moved in with Samantha, communication had shrunk to bare essentials. When I called, he responded when it was convenient. When I visited, the conversations were brief, controlled, careful. Samantha kept a polite distance. Her eyes scanned me the way someone scans a stranger waiting in the wrong line. One visit stood out. I had stopped by unannounced on my way back from a doctor's appointment. Andrew opened the door only a few inches. His body blocked the interior of the apartment. "You should call first," he murmured. His eyes drifted behind him, as if checking whether Samantha was close enough to hear. "I was nearby," I explained. "I thought I could bring the muffins Mrs. Green shared." His shoulders tightened. "Not everything revolves around you." The sentence had landed quietly, without anger, but it changed something in me. I turned, walked back to my car, and drove home without eating any of the muffins. After that, I stopped initiating visits. I stopped calling on weekends. I answered when he reached out, but I no longer filled the silence between us. The space had grown too wide to cross without falling. Standing in my living room now, I touched the back of the chair Andrew used to sit in. 18 days had passed since his last message, the longest silence so far. I lowered my hand and took a slow breath. The disappearance hadn't been sudden. It had been happening one quiet step at a time. The wedding took place on a warm afternoon in a Denver garden venue. I arrived early, holding a small wrapped gift in my purse and adjusting my dress so it wouldn't wrinkle on the walk from the parking lot. The entrance was lined with white chairs and pastel flowers. Guests were taking photos, greeting each other, finding their seats. I looked around for Andrew. An usher held a clipboard near the aisle. I walked toward him and gave my name. He scanned the list, then pointed me toward the third row on the left. The instruction was clear and quick. I nodded and followed the path to my seat. The first 2 rows were filled with Samantha's family, her parents, her aunts, cousins, several people I didn't recognize. They spoke to each other with easy familiarity. Laughter passed through the group as someone shared a comment. I adjusted my purse on my lap and kept my hands folded. I recognized Samantha's mother instantly. She wore a formal blue dress and moved with confidence, greeting guests with a smile that reached everyone except me. When her eyes met mine, she offered a polite nod, nothing more. I looked around for Andrew again. He appeared near the front with his groomsmen, adjusting the cuff of his shirt. His expression was focused, busy. He glanced across the rows but didn't lock eyes with me. A photographer tapped his shoulder, and he shifted aside to pose for a few quick pictures. People continued filing in, friends of the couple, co-workers, members of Samantha's extended family. I counted at least 15 relatives from her side sitting ahead of me. Only 2 people I knew were anywhere near my row. An older couple I had met once during Andrew's college graduation. The pastor took his place under the floral arch. Music started playing through small speakers set along the aisle. The wedding planner held up her hand to cue the bridal procession. The bridesmaids walked slowly down the aisle, each holding a bouquet of pale pink flowers. I tracked their steps, waiting for the moment Samantha appeared. When she finally entered, the entire front row leaned forward. Cameras rose. A few people gasped softly. She walked with controlled steps, eyes fixed on Andrew. Her dress was simple but elegant, fitted at the waist with a smooth train behind her. Andrew straightened when he saw her approaching. I stayed still, hands clasped, watching from behind the rows of her family. During the ceremony, the pastor spoke about unity, commitment, choosing each other every day. The words washed over the crowd. I kept my attention on Andrew. He looked nervous but hopeful, glancing at Samantha with a small, tentative smile. I waited for his eyes to find me again. They never did. When the pastor invited the parents of the bride and groom to stand for a blessing, Samantha's parents rose with practiced ease. The crowd turned toward them, applauding lightly. I remained seated. No one looked in my direction. After the vows, the couple walked back up the aisle while guests clapped and took pictures. I stood with everyone else, watching them pass. Andrew's eyes passed over my row but didn't stop. Samantha's gaze moved quickly across the crowd, focused only on the front. People followed the couple to the reception area, a covered patio decorated with string lights and long tables. I stayed toward the back of the moving crowd, letting others walk ahead. At the reception, groups gathered quickly. Samantha's parents stood near the head table, greeting guests and coordinating photos. I waited near the edge of the patio, unsure where to go first. A server passed by offering glasses of sparkling juice. I took one and held it without drinking. I moved toward Andrew when he stepped aside for a moment. The ceremony was beautiful, I told him, keeping my voice low so he wouldn't feel pressured. He gave a small nod, quick and distracted. Yeah, busy day. Someone called his name from the other side of the patio. He glanced over his shoulder. I need to check something with the planner. He walked away before I could say anything more. I stayed where I was, holding the glass gently so it wouldn't slip. Samantha approached the gift table with 2 bridesmaids, her posture straight and her expression composed. She lifted a ribbon from a gift and read the tag. Her eyes moved across the table, scanning each package. When she reached the small one I had placed earlier, she paused, then looked away. She didn't pick it up. The music shifted to something livelier. Guests gathered near the dance floor. The photographer directed the couple to stand near the cake for formal shots. I moved toward a chair near the back, taking a seat where I wouldn't be in the way. A group of Samantha's relatives sat 2 tables ahead. They shared stories, laughed loudly, clapped when the couple cut the cake. Every interaction felt fluid and comfortable. I watched, silent and steady, keeping my hands folded in my lap. The servers brought out plates of food. My plate was placed in front of me last. I picked at the salad, not out of emotion, but because hunger never came. I listened to the conversations around me without joining them. When the first dance started, I stood and stepped farther back, closer to the edge of the patio. Andrew and Samantha moved together under the lights. Every camera pointed at them. They looked like they belonged to a world that had no place for me. I stayed until the music began to fade and guests started preparing for the bouquet toss. At that point, I slipped away from the crowd and walked toward the parking lot. The evening air was colder now, the breeze moving through the trees around the venue. On the bus ride home, I kept my purse on my lap and watched the city pass by. The gift I brought remained unopened on the table back at the reception. I pictured it sitting there, unnoticed, surrounded by brighter packages and louder families. When I reached my stop, I stepped off the bus and walked up the sidewalk toward my house. The porch light remained broken. I unlocked the door and went inside. I set my purse down and stood in the kitchen for a long moment, letting the quiet settle. One thought surfaced, steady and clear. I wasn't part of their picture. The first time I heard about the pregnancy, it came through a short message from Andrew. No greeting, no details, just a single line letting me know they were expecting a baby in the fall. I stood in my kitchen rereading the message, waiting for a follow-up that never arrived. I typed a response congratulating them and asking how Samantha was feeling. Andrew replied hours later, confirming she was fine. Nothing more. Weeks went by without updates. I reached out occasionally, keeping my messages brief so I wouldn't seem intrusive. Most of the time, Andrew responded late at night with short, careful replies. Samantha never contacted me directly. I knitted a small blue blanket during those weeks. It was something to keep my hands busy during long evenings, something soft and steady. I folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer so it wouldn't gather dust. I planned to finish a matching hat after the next doctor's appointment, assuming Andrew would tell me when it was. He didn't. Instead, I learned everything through social media. One afternoon, while organizing shelves at the bakery during a slow shift, my phone buzzed with a notification. I wiped flour from my hands and checked the screen. Samantha had posted a picture of a pair of tiny shoes on a white background. The caption mentioned how excited they were for the baby boy arriving soon. That was how I found out the baby was a boy. I stared at the photo until the screen dimmed. The bell on the bakery door chimed as a customer entered, so I placed the phone back in my apron pocket and continued stacking bread. I didn't react outwardly. The job needed to be done, and the customer didn't need to know what I just learned. That evening, I pulled the blue blanket from the drawer. The color suddenly felt heavier, but I folded it again with steady hands and placed it back where it belonged. A few days later, I tried calling Andrew. The phone rang several times before going to voicemail. I left a simple message checking on Samantha, then went about my evening chores, washing dishes, sweeping the floor, wiping the table. When he returned the call the next day, he kept his voice low, almost distracted. "Everything's fine," he muttered. "Just busy." I asked if I could visit before the baby arrived. There was a pause, short but heavy enough to feel deliberate. "I'll talk to Samantha," he murmured. I thanked him and hung up. I waited for a message that didn't come. Samantha's mother, on the other hand, was in almost every photo. She attended every prenatal class, stood next to Samantha during ultrasounds, and accompanied her to appointments. Her hand rested on Samantha's shoulder in nearly every picture, a clear sign of presence and approval. I recognized the setting of one of the photos, the atrium of St. Luke's. A large Christmas tree stood behind them, and Samantha's mother looked proud, almost glowing. I kept the phone steady, my expression unchanged. I sent a message to Andrew asking when the next appointment was. He answered later that night. "We'll figure it out." 2 days passed, no follow-up message. During that time, I met Rosa at the grocery store again. She noticed the quiet before I explained anything. We stood near the produce section, selecting vegetables with slow, deliberate movements. "How's Andrew?" she asked gently. "Busy," I replied. Rosa pressed her lips together. "They're building their own life. You can't wait around forever." "I know." She rested her hand on my arm. "Don't let them take more from you." I nodded once. "I won't." After she walked away, I stood still for a moment, letting the words settle in. Then I finished my errands and headed home. One morning, I woke early and checked my phone before getting out of bed. No new messages. I dressed for my shift, grabbed my purse, and locked the door behind me. The walk to the bus stop was quiet, with frost gathering along the edges of the sidewalk. At the bakery, I worked through the morning rush, pouring coffee, handing out pastries, keeping the counters clean. Mrs. Green watched me carefully as I moved from task to task. "You're quieter today," she observed. "Just thinking." "Be careful not to think yourself into a corner." I gave a small nod and continued working. She didn't push the subject. That evening, another post appeared on Samantha's page. A picture of the nursery. Light gray walls, shelves lined with stuffed animals, a mobile hanging above the crib. Samantha's mother stood beside the crib, smiling proudly. The caption read, "Everything ready for our little boy." There was no sign of Andrew in the picture. There was no sign that I existed at all. I zoomed in on the blanket draped over the crib. It wasn't the one I made. It was a new one, store-bought, bright, and neatly patterned. I lowered the phone and placed it on the counter. I sat at the kitchen table for a long moment, letting the house settle around me. The refrigerator hummed. The heater clicked. Snow drifted against the window. Everything felt steady, except the space between me and my son. I typed one more message. "Please let me know if I can visit when the baby comes." Andrew responded the next day. "We'll see. Samantha needs rest." I reread the message once, then deleted it from the screen. My hand stayed steady. The following week, I finished the blue blanket and placed it inside a small box with a ribbon around it. I left it on the table, ready for whenever the visit would happen, if it ever did. Rosa called that same evening. Her voice carried quiet concern. "You're doing everything you can," she told me. "I know." "Don't let them keep you on the outside forever." I kept my voice even. "They'll reach out when they're ready." Rosa didn't argue. She understood too well the kind of patience that hurts more the longer it lasts. I looked toward the box on the table, simple, neat, untouched, and exhaled slowly. I was becoming a grandmother to a child I had never met. The birth announcement reached me during my evening cleaning shift at the community center. I was wiping down a counter in the supply room when my phone buzzed. I pulled it from my pocket, expecting a reminder or a message from Rosa. Instead, a notification from Samantha's profile filled the screen. A photo of a newborn wrapped in a white blanket. The caption read, "Welcome, Noah." I froze, the cleaning cloth still in my hand. The supply room light buzzed faintly overhead, the same steady hum it always made. Nothing around me changed, but something inside me did. I zoomed in on the picture. His face was soft, eyes closed, a tiny hand resting near his cheek. It was the first time I had ever seen him. A coworker stepped into the doorway, carrying a stack of folded chairs. I moved aside so he could pass. He didn't notice the screen, and I didn't try to show him. I slipped the phone into my apron pocket and walked to the back sink. My hands rested on the edge of the counter until the shaking stopped. When my shift ended, I clocked out and walked to the bus stop. The air was cold, sharp enough to make my eyes water, but I kept my expression neutral. The bus arrived a few minutes later. I boarded, found a seat near the back, and checked the photo again. Samantha held Noah in the second picture, a wide smile on her face. Her mother stood next to her, resting a hand on Samantha's shoulder. Both of them looked proud. Andrew was visible in the corner of the frame, half turned away from the camera, adjusting something on the table. My hand tightened around the phone, not from anger, from clarity. I opened a message thread with Andrew. When did he arrive? His reply came 20 minutes later. Last night. I looked at the timestamp. He had been awake. He had time to post photos. He had time to contact others. He simply didn't contact me. I typed slowly. Can I visit the hospital? Another pause. Then, not right now. Samantha needs quiet. I stared at the message. I breathed once, long and steady. I typed again. Her mother was there. A longer pause this time. Mom, don't make this harder. I placed the phone face down on my lap. The bus rattled along the street, hitting a few bumps. A child laughed somewhere near the front. A woman spoke softly on a call, discussing dinner plans. The world continued as if nothing had shifted. I got off at my stop and walked home in the dark. Inside, I hung my coat, placed my purse on the table, and sat down without turning on the overhead light. The refrigerator hum filled the kitchen. The house felt steady, unchanged. I picked up the phone again and looked at Noah's picture one more time. The lighting in the hospital room was bright, the kind used for newborn photos. His skin was soft, his eyes closed peacefully. I studied the image carefully, memorizing every detail. A small detail in this background caught my attention: a visitor's sticker on Samantha's mother's jacket, the kind given to people allowed access past the maternity desk. I rubbed my thumb over the corner of the phone. I opened another message to Andrew. I'd like to meet him soon. His reply arrived close to midnight. We'll see. I didn't respond. The next morning, I woke before dawn. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the mug warming my hands. My phone remained silent, the screen blank. I glanced at the small box containing the blue blanket I had knitted. I rested my hand on the lid for a moment before pulling my hand back. During my bakery shift, my mind stayed sharp. The routine helped. Warm bread, ringing bell, short conversations with customers. Mrs. Green watched me closely as I worked. You're focused today, she noted while checking a tray of rolls. I have a lot on my mind. Her eyes softened. Don't lose yourself in it. I nodded. I won't. Later that afternoon, during a short break, I checked my phone again. Another post appeared on Samantha's page. This time, a picture of Samantha's mother holding Noah, smiling directly at the camera. The caption read, "Best Grandma in the World." I kept my breathing steady. I didn't comment. I didn't react. I locked the phone and placed it back in my apron. That evening, I called Andrew once more. He answered on the third ring. Noise filled the background, hospital sounds, distant voices. Is Noah doing well? I asked. He's fine. I'd like to visit before you leave the hospital. Another pause. I could hear him exhale. Samantha's tired. She needs space. I understand, but I'm his grandmother. A quiet beat stretched between us. Mom, it's not a good time. I held the phone close. Then tell me when it is. He didn't respond right away. I heard footsteps, someone adjusting equipment, a door closing. I'll let you know, he finally whispered. He ended the call. I placed the phone on the table and let the room settle around me. The kitchen felt colder than usual. I stood, walked to the window, and watched snow fall in slow, steady lines. My grandson had been born. I had found out through a public post. Samantha's mother held him before I even knew he existed in the world outside her womb. I rested my hand on the back of a chair until my breathing steadied. There was no anger, no outburst, just a quiet, firm recognition of what had happened. The first day of Noah's life had been shared with everyone except me. The days after Noah's birth moved quietly, one blending into the next. I kept my phone close, checking it more often than usual, though I didn't expect much. The silence didn't surprise me. It only confirmed what had already been unfolding. Every update about Noah came from Samantha's social media. She posted regularly, photos of him sleeping, short videos of him stretching his arms, a picture of him wrapped in a blanket with tiny animal prints. Her captions were warm and expressive. Her friends commented with hearts and congratulations. Samantha replied to each of them, except me. I left simple comments, nothing emotional, nothing demanding, nothing that could be perceived as pressure. Beautiful. Glad he's healthy. Wishing you rest?" She replied to everyone else within minutes. My words remained untouched. Each comment sat there like it wasn't visible to them. On the third day, Rosa stopped by with a bag of groceries. She stepped into my kitchen, placed the bag on the counter, and removed her gloves. "You've been quiet," she observed. "I'm keeping busy." Rosa looked at me for a long moment, the kind of look that doesn't push, but doesn't let you hide either. "Did they call you?" "No." She pulled out a carton of eggs and placed it in the fridge. "They're not thinking about you." "I know." Rosa leaned against the counter. "You can't wait for people who don't make room for you." "I'm aware." She lowered her voice. "What else can they take from you?" I didn't answer. She didn't need me to. Rosa squeezed my arm gently before leaving. "I'm nearby if you need me." After she left, I washed the dishes and cleaned the counters. The motions were simple and grounding. I didn't hurry. I didn't drift. I moved through the house with purpose, even if my mind was not fully there. Each time the phone buzzed, I checked it immediately. None of the notifications were from Andrew. They were reminders from the pharmacy, updates from the weather app, occasional messages from Rosa, and automated emails from places I barely remembered signing up for. Every evening, I sent Andrew a small message. "How's Noah? How's Samantha? Let me know if you need anything." Most nights he didn't respond. When he did, it was late. "He's fine. She's resting. We're tired." Simple statements, no warmth, no invitation to continue the conversation. On the 7th day, I typed a longer message in drafts asking if I could visit. I didn't send it. I deleted it and wrote a shorter one instead. "Thinking of you all." He replied the next morning with a thumbs-up emoji. The silence stretched into the second week. I kept working my shifts at the bakery. Mrs. Green watched my behavior closely. "You're quieter," she noted as she organized cookie trays. "I'm managing. You're allowed to feel things, you know." "I do, just not at work." She nodded with understanding and moved to the front counter. During slow hours, I checked my phone. Samantha posted a picture of Noah during tummy time. Another photo showed Samantha's mother feeding him a bottle. A third post captured a moment where Noah's hand wrapped around Samantha's finger. No sign of Andrew in any of them. No sign of me in their world. I kept scrolling and then stopped when I reached the end of the feed. That night, after dinner, I walked through the house without turning on many lights. I checked the windows, folded blankets, and placed dishes in the dishwasher. My movements were steady, controlled. I wasn't waiting for emotional release. I wasn't expecting anything from anyone. But the silence had weight. On the 15th day, I tried calling Andrew again. The call rang 3 times before going to voicemail. I left no message. Instead, I texted him. "Would like to visit when things settle." He responded 10 hours later. "Let me talk to Samantha." I placed the phone on the table, screen down, and began wiping the counters again. The cloth moved steadily under my hand, removing crumbs, smoothing the surface, keeping me grounded. 2 days passed. No reply. Rosa called again. "You look tired," she commented when I answered. "I'm fine." "No. You're waiting for something that should already be yours." "I'm giving them space." Rosa hesitated. "Space isn't the problem." "I know." We stayed on the phone for a few minutes before she wished me good night. On the 19th day, I opened the blue box containing the blanket I'd knitted. I unfolded it, checking the stitching to make sure everything was even. My fingers brushed the soft yarn. I folded it again carefully and tied the ribbon back in place. That evening, while washing dishes, my phone buzzed on the counter. I dried my hands and picked it up. A message from Andrew. "You can visit, but only for 1 day." I reread the words slowly, letting each part sink in. Only 1 day, a scheduled visit, structured, limited, conditional, not a welcome, a permission. I sat down at the kitchen table, placed the phone in front of me, and kept my hand on top of it. The room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the heater. I breathed once, steady and controlled. 3 weeks of silence. 3 weeks of public posts I wasn't part of. 3 weeks of watching Samantha's mother take the place a grandmother should naturally have. Now I had 1 day. Not because they wanted me, not because they missed me, but because, after 3 weeks, they felt obligated to offer something minimal. I stood, walked to the bedroom, and reached for the box containing the blue blanket. I held it against my chest for a brief moment, then placed it gently inside my purse. The visit would be small, it would be limited, but it would be something. For now, that had to be enough. The night before the visit, I placed everything on the kitchen table so I wouldn't forget anything in the morning. The small blue blanket I had knitted, a soft baby outfit with tiny buttons, a framed photo of Andrew when he was 5, cleaned and polished. I arranged them in a neat row, making sure nothing looked rushed or out of place. The house was quiet as I moved from room to room, checking the windows, turning off lights, preparing myself. I didn't feel excited. Excitement didn't fit the situation. What I felt was focus, clarity. This was my one day. Before going to bed, I checked my phone again. No additional message from Andrew. Just the original line. You can visit, but only for one day. I placed the phone face down on the nightstand and lay still until sleep finally reached me. I woke before dawn. The air in the house was cold, and the heater worked slowly to catch up. I pulled on a sweater and walked into the kitchen. The items on the table were exactly where I'd left them. I packed them carefully into my purse, making sure the blanket stayed folded and the outfit didn't wrinkle. I checked myself in the bathroom mirror. My hair was neat, my clothes simple but clean. I applied a small touch of makeup, not for vanity, but to look steady and composed. I wanted to look like someone who belonged in her grandson's life, even if no one else believed it. The bus schedule showed the first route leaving at 6:15. I locked the door behind me and walked toward the stop. Frost covered the sidewalk, and the streetlights cast a dim yellow glow along the road. A few cars passed, their engines loud in the early quiet. When the bus arrived, I climbed aboard and chose a seat near the window. The interior lights flickered once, then stabilized. I placed my purse on my lap and rested my hands on top of it. The blanket inside felt like a steady weight. The ride lasted several hours. I watched the passing scenery without distraction. Empty roads, quiet neighborhoods, gas stations with only 1 or 2 customers. Each mile brought me closer to St. Luke's, and each mile required more control over my breathing. At one point, a woman across the aisle adjusted her sleeping child against her shoulder. I watched her movements, gentle, instinctive, familiar. I looked away before she noticed. When the bus pulled into the city station, I stepped off and tightened my coat. Cold air hit my face sharply. I walked to the restroom inside the terminal and washed my hands, smoothing my hair again. I checked my reflection one more time. I looked calm, older than before, but steady. I reapplied a small line of lipstick, then held the edge of the sink until the nervous energy settled. I didn't want to arrive looking shaken. I wanted to look like myself. Outside the station, I boarded the connecting bus toward St. Luke's. The streets grew busier. Parents pushing strollers, workers hurrying toward morning shifts, cars lining up for coffee drive-thrus. I kept my eyes on the hospital rising in the distance, its windows catching the early sunlight. When the bus stopped at the corner, I stepped onto the sidewalk and adjusted the strap of my purse again. The blanket inside shifted slightly. I steadied it with my hand. The walk from the bus stop to the hospital entrance wasn't far. The air smelled of cold pavement and distant exhaust. A maintenance worker shoveled salt along the walkway. A nurse passed me, heading toward the employee entrance, holding a warm drink in a paper cup. I reached the main doors. The automatic sensor opened them slowly, letting warm air brush against my face. Inside, the lobby was bright and controlled. Families sat in the waiting area. Some held flowers. Others scrolled through their phones, waiting for updates. My steps slowed as I approached the elevator. I pressed the button and watched the numbers descend. When the doors opened, I stepped inside and stood near the back, holding the rail lightly. Each floor number lit up one at a time as the elevator rose. I straightened my jacket, then repositioned my purse strap. My fingers brushed the blue blanket again. On the maternity floor, the hallway looked almost identical to the one from Christmas Day. Nurses moved between rooms. A cart squeaked across the tile. The overhead lights cast the same even glow. I kept my steps quiet, measured, and steady. I checked my phone. A message from Andrew arrived 30 minutes earlier. "We're in the waiting area near pediatrics." I walked there slowly. The waiting area had a row of chairs, a water dispenser, and a few posters on the wall showing newborn care tips. I lowered myself into the seat closest to the corner, keeping my purse on my lap. My hands rested on top of it, not shaking, just ready. As I waited, an older couple across the room spoke softly while flipping through a baby magazine. A young father paced near the window, glancing at his watch. A nurse wheeled an empty bassinet past the chairs. I kept my posture straight. I whispered under my breath, only once, only quietly, "Today, I will finally hold him." The sentence wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was factual. A simple truth I intended to see through. A door opened across the room. Footsteps approached. I looked up. Andrew and Samantha appeared at the end of the hallway. I tightened my grip on the purse, adjusted the blanket inside, and prepared for whatever version of welcome they were willing to offer. Samantha reached the waiting area first. Her steps were controlled, her expression composed. Andrew followed a few paces behind, shoulders tense, eyes lowered. I stood up slowly, keeping my posture straight, my purse held firmly in both hands. Samantha offered a brief nod. Nothing warm, nothing welcoming. "We're running a little behind," she murmured, adjusting the blanket draped over her arm. "Noah just finished a feeding." "I understand," I replied. Andrew glanced at me once, then looked at the floor. He shifted his weight, rubbing his palms against his jeans as if unsure where to rest his hands. I took a small step forward. "May I see him?" Samantha kept her gaze steady, her tone clipped. "He's asleep right now." As if on cue, a soft sound came from the bundle in her arms. Not a cry, just a tiny stir, the kind newborns make when shifting positions. I tightened my grip on the purse, waiting. His movement grew a little stronger, just enough to lift a corner of the blanket. I recognized that small, natural sign of wakefulness. I opened my mouth, ready to ask again. Samantha adjusted her hold quickly, turning slightly away. "He's hungry," she added. I paused. "He just finished feeding." Samantha didn't acknowledge the correction. She kept her eyes fixed on the hallway behind me, as if searching for an exit. Andrew stepped closer to her side, avoiding my eyes completely. A nurse pushed open the door to the pediatric office. "Morgan family?" Samantha raised her hand. "Here." The nurse motioned them inside. I moved to follow, but Samantha shifted her body subtly to block the doorway. Andrew didn't move aside either. The nurse glanced at me politely, but didn't invite me in. Her eyes returned to her clipboard. Samantha stepped through the doorway, leaving no space for me. I remained in the waiting area. The door clicked shut, the sound sharp but controlled. I lowered myself back into the chair, resting my purse on my lap. My hand stayed still. I listened to the quiet hum of the vending machine and the faint murmur of voices behind the closed door. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Families came and went. A father pushed a stroller down the hall. A nurse walked past with a clipboard. My phone stayed silent on the table beside me. When the door finally opened, Samantha walked out first, her expression unchanged. Andrew followed, carrying a folder filled with papers from the appointment. He held it against his chest, his grip tense. I stood again. "How did it go?" Samantha adjusted the strap of her diaper bag. "Routine check. Everything's fine." I waited for Andrew to add something. Anything. He didn't. I glanced toward the folder. "I would like to hear about it." "It's all normal," Samantha replied. "We covered everything inside." Andrew looked at the floor, shifting the folder to one arm. His silence felt practiced. I nodded once, then kept my voice steady. "Could I hold him now?" Samantha's eyes flicked toward the hallway exit. "We need to get him home. He gets overstimulated." Andrew glanced at his watch. "We should go." I took one step closer. "I can walk to the car with you." Samantha pressed her lips together. "It wouldn't be comfortable." The words landed cleanly, without hesitation. Andrew rubbed the back of his neck. "Mom, don't make this harder." I held his gaze for the first time that day. He looked away almost immediately, focusing on the diaper bag, the floor, anywhere but my face. Samantha repositioned Noah and turned toward the exit. Andrew followed. I walked beside them at a respectful distance, not close enough to intrude, not far enough to seem detached. When Samantha reached the lobby, she shifted Noah slightly. The blanket moved, revealing a small portion of his cheek. I stopped walking. Not dramatically, just enough to take in the moment. Andrew noticed. He paused too, almost in reflex, but Samantha kept moving. At the doors, she slowed. A nurse approached and held the door open for them. Samantha thanked her quietly and stepped outside into the cold. Andrew followed, holding the folder tightly against his chest. I watched them walk toward the parking lot, not running, not hurrying, just moving with the steady, deliberate pace of people who had already made up their minds about the limits they intended to set. Inside the lobby, a few visitors looked in my direction. I ignored them. I kept my focus steady, my breath even. A cafeteria stood on the right side of the lobby. Its lights were bright, and the smell of warm bread drifted out. I walked toward it, taking a seat at a small table near the corner. A clock on the wall ticked rhythmically. The sound was steady, measured, neither comforting nor harsh. I placed my purse on the table and unzipped it. The blue blanket inside remained perfectly folded. I touched the corner with 2 fingers, then closed the purse again. I watched people come and go from the cafeteria. Parents held infants against their shoulders. Nurses grabbed quick lunches before returning to their shifts. A volunteer refilled the napkin dispenser. I sat there quietly, not moving more than necessary. A text from Andrew finally appeared. "We're heading home. Thanks for coming." No invitation, no plan for later, just closure for the moment. I read the message twice, then locked my phone. I remained at the table long enough to finish a cup of water from the dispenser. My hand stayed steady, my expression unchanged. When I eventually stood, I moved with the same controlled pace I had used all day. Outside, the cold air met me with a sharp, familiar sting. I positioned my purse against my side and walked toward the bus stop at the edge of the parking lot. The visit was over. I had been in the same building as my grandson for nearly 2 hours. I had carried a blanket for him. I had waited quietly and patiently, and yet I had not held him, not even for a moment. The taxi ride to the bus station was quiet. I sat in the back seat with my purse held firmly against my lap. The driver kept his eyes on the road, the heater humming as we moved through Denver traffic. Samantha sat beside me in the back, holding Noah. Andrew took the passenger seat in front, giving short directions whenever the driver asked which route to take. No one spoke beyond that. When the taxi slowed near the station entrance, Samantha looked down at Noah, adjusting the blanket around him. His eyes were barely open, shifting in small, uncoordinated movements the way newborns do. I kept my gaze steady, waiting for instruction. Samantha unbuckled the infant carrier. "Can you hold him for a moment?" Her voice was flat, controlled, as if this were an inconvenience, not a gesture. I nodded once. She placed Noah in my arms with a quick, efficient motion. I positioned him carefully, supporting his head, settling him against my chest. His warmth pushed through the blanket, steady and soft. His breath rose and fell in small, rhythmic movements. My fingers traced the outline of his tiny hand, the short curve of his nose, the fine hair along his forehead. He didn't open his eyes fully, but they moved behind the lids, reacting to light and sound around us. I whispered only once, "Hello, darling." My voice stayed low, firm, steady. Andrew turned in his seat to glance back. He didn't smile, but his eyes lingered for a brief second. Then he faced forward again. I shifted slightly to hold Noah more securely. His hand tightened around the edge of my sweater. The contact was small, but it settled into my chest with precise clarity. I memorized the weight of him, the way he breathed, the faint sound he made when he shifted. These were the details I had been waiting months for, details no one could take from me. The taxi idled at the curb. A bus pulled in behind us, releasing a small cloud of exhaust. People began lining up with suitcases and backpacks. The driver checked the rearview mirror. "We're here," he noted. Andrew opened his door and stepped out. I adjusted Noah once more, making sure the blanket stayed in place. The air outside looked colder than before. I didn't want Noah exposed to it longer than necessary. Samantha opened her door next and stepped onto the sidewalk. She turned, reaching toward me. Her expression remained controlled, almost impatient, not rushed, just ready to move on. I held Noah a few seconds longer, long enough to kiss his forehead gently, long enough to feel the warmth of his breath, long enough to lock in the memory. My 5 minutes. Nothing more, nothing less. I handed him back carefully. Samantha took him with a quick, practiced motion, adjusting him against her shoulder. She tapped his back lightly as she shifted her weight. Andrew moved around to my side of the taxi. "Thanks for understanding." His tone was polite, practiced, detached. "I understand," I replied. Nothing in my voice cracked. Nothing trembled. There was no plea, no question, no request for the next time. I stood with the same calm I had held all day. Andrew nodded a small acknowledgement, then turned to follow Samantha toward their car. She secured Noah in the back seat, while Andrew placed the diaper bag beside him. They exchanged a few quiet words I didn't catch. Then Andrew closed the door and walked to the driver's side. Before lowering himself into the seat, he glanced in my direction. Not long enough to communicate regret or apology, just a glance. A simple, quick look that carried nothing beyond recognition of my presence. I lifted my purse strap onto my shoulder and stepped back from the taxi. The driver pulled away once the door closed. I watched Andrew's car signal left and merge into traffic. They never looked back. I turned toward the bus station entrance. People hurried in and out, dragging suitcases, checking boarding numbers, calling relatives to share their arrival times. A large digital board listed upcoming departures. I scanned it until I found my route. As I waited in line, I took out my phone. A new post notification appeared from Samantha's account. I tapped it open. A photo showed her holding Noah in the back seat of their car, her face close to his, both of them framed neatly in soft, natural light. The caption read, "Perfect morning with the ones I love." There was no space beside them where I might have been, no mention of a visit, no acknowledgement that I had been there at all. I locked the phone and placed it back into my purse. The boarding line moved forward. I handed my ticket to the attendant and climbed onto the bus. I chose a window seat halfway down the aisle. The heater under the seat clicked twice before turning on. I rested my purse on my lap, my hands on top of it. The memory of Noah's warmth stayed with me. His tiny hand, his breathing, the brief weight of him against my chest. 5 minutes, enough to record everything clearly. I leaned back, closed my eyes briefly, and took a slow, steady breath. No trembling, no urgency, just a quiet acknowledgement of what the morning had been. A moment. Not an invitation, not a beginning, just a moment I would not forget. Outside, the bus pulled away from the curb. The station grew smaller in the window, then disappeared behind buildings and traffic. My 5 minutes of being a grandmother were over. I reached home late in the afternoon. The house felt colder than usual when I stepped inside, even with the heater turning on automatically. I hung my coat on the hook, placed my purse on the kitchen table, and stood still for a few seconds. The silence around me was steady, familiar, unchanged. I filled a glass with water and took a small sip. The taste was flat, but it grounded me. I set the glass down and opened the curtains slightly. Snow covered the front yard in a thin, uneven layer. A delivery truck drove past, its headlights cutting across the window for a brief moment before disappearing. Before I could reach for the light switch, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Long string of digits. No name attached. I let it ring twice before picking it up. "Is this Patricia Morgan?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes." "This is the billing department from St. Luke's Hospital. We're calling about an outstanding balance connected to a recent delivery." I straightened. "What balance?" "A remaining amount of $19,806. The primary insurance covered part of it, but the secondary payer listed for the account is you." My grip tightened around the phone. "I'm not the secondary payer. Our records list your name and address under emergency financial responsibility. We contact that party when a balance remains." My breathing stayed steady. Who listed me that way? I'm not able to see who entered it, only that your information is on file. We will need confirmation to proceed with billing arrangements. I walked to the kitchen table, set the phone on speaker, and rested both hands flat against the wood. I don't have any family in Denver, I stated, each word clean and controlled. There was a brief pause on the other end. I'm sorry, ma'am. You have the wrong person, I continued. I am not responsible for that bill. We can remove you from the account if you confirm that you were listed in error. You can. The woman cleared her throat softly. Understood. I'll mark the file accordingly and forward the adjustment request to my supervisor. Thank you. The call ended. I turned off the speaker and placed the phone face down on the table. I didn't pace. I didn't sit. I simply stood there, hands steady against the wood, letting the information settle. Andrew had used my name on the hospital form. After everything that had happened, that hallway, the exclusion, the visit limited to one day, he had still placed my name where it didn't belong. Not as family, only as financial backup. I pulled out a chair and lowered myself onto it. My fingers brushed the grain of the table. The room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the heater growing stronger in the vents. Across the table sat the blue blanket I had knitted. I unfolded it slowly, checking the stitching along the edges. My work was neat, consistent, steady. I ran a hand across the yarn, then folded it again. The phone buzzed. A message from Andrew appeared. Mom, just checking if you got home safe. I stared at the screen for a long moment. No mention of the bill, no mention of responsibility. Just a casual check-in, as if the morning had been normal. I typed back a single line. I got home. His response arrived almost immediately. Good. It's been a long day for us, too. I locked the phone and set it aside. I stood and walked into the living room. The photo of Andrew at 16 still sat on the shelf. I lifted it, dusted the top edge, and held it for a moment. The boy in the picture had no idea who he would become. He had no idea how far he would drift, or how small he would make the space for me in his new life. I returned the photo to its place and moved toward the hallway. Each step felt deliberate, unhurried. The house wasn't loud or dramatic. It simply existed, unchanged, ready for whatever decision came next. I entered the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. The small lamp cast an even circle of light across the blanket. I reached for my purse and removed the notepad I kept inside. I opened it to a blank page and wrote one short sentence. I am responsible for myself. Nothing more. I closed the notepad, returned it to the purse, and sat upright with my hands folded. A quiet awareness settled in, the type that doesn't arrive with emotion, but with clarity. I had spent months trying to hold a place in Andrew's life. I had waited for updates, extended offers, traveled long distances, accepted limits, and stepped aside more times than I cared to count. Even after being pushed out of moments that belonged naturally to me, I had still shown up. But today, a line had been crossed. Not the rejection, not the silence, not the controlled visit. It was the bill. The decision to place my name on a form he didn't want me to be part of. A choice made out of convenience, not connection. That was the moment everything shifted, not loudly. Not with anger, just with clarity. I stood and walked back to the kitchen. The phone lay where I had left it. I picked it up and tapped out one more message to Andrew. You'll need to correct the hospital records. I am not responsible. He responded after a minute. I didn't think it was a big deal. I'll fix it. Nothing else. No apology. No explanation. No acknowledgement of what it meant. I turned off the phone and placed it on the counter. For the first time in months, the silence around me felt like mine. Not something forced on me, but something I chose. I pulled down the small calendar from the wall. Tomorrow's date was blank. I wrote one note in the space. Start again. No emotion attached, no dramatic meaning, just the next step. I turned off the kitchen light and let the darkness settle. The house felt steady. So did I. That was the story of how one quiet grandmother held her dignity through every door that closed on her, and how she chose clarity over chaos when the people she loved most stopped choosing her. If this story reminded you of something from your own life, or if it gave you a moment of strength, I'm glad it reached you. If you'd like to hear more, you're welcome to stay with us. Thank you for watching, thank you for your time, and I hope to see you again in the next story.